In the heart of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by icy waters and unpredictable currents, sat Alcatraz, a prison unlike any other. It wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol. For decades, the very name struck fear into criminals. People called it the Rock, a place built to break the spirit of even the most dangerous and determined men. Opened in 1934, Alcatraz was designed for one purpose: to hold the country's most notorious, most unmanageable prisoners. Gangsters like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly served time here. But this wasn't a place for rehabilitation. Alcatraz was where the government sent the hopeless cases, the inmates who had tried and failed to escape from other prisons. Here, escape was said to be impossible. The numbers supported that claim. In the 29 years it operated, 36 prisoners tried to escape. Officially, all were caught, shot, or drowned. The prison's natural defenses made it a nightmare for anyone who thought about running. The waters of the bay averaged a frigid 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to sap a man's strength in minutes. Add to that strong tidal currents, and you had the perfect natural moat. Even if you could somehow get off the island, the swim to the mainland was a death sentence for most. The prison itself was a fortress. The cell blocks were made of reinforced concrete, the windows fitted with steel bars. Guards were armed, alert, and trained to respond instantly to any disturbance. Inmates were counted multiple times a day. Even minor violations of rules were met with swift punishment. But in 1960, 3 inmates began to challenge the legend of Alcatraz. Frank Morris was the leader, a career criminal. He had spent most of his life behind bars in and out of reformatories and penitentiaries. What made him different was his mind. Morris reportedly had an IQ of 133, higher than 98% of the population. He was meticulous, calculating, and capable of long-term planning, the kind of traits that made him dangerous in a place like Alcatraz. Then there were John and Clarence Anglin, brothers from Georgia. They'd grown up poor, picking crops with their large family, but eventually drifted into a life of bank robbery. They were skilled with their hands and had a knack for working with tools, even makeshift ones. They also shared an unshakable loyalty to each other. The 3 men met in Alcatraz, and their paths aligned. Each had the same goal: get off the island. And each understood that the only way to succeed would be to outthink the system completely. The first step in their plan wasn't to escape, it was to observe. They spent months studying everything: the guards' routines, the times they were counted, which areas were dark at night, and which corners of the prison were rarely checked. They learned that the air vents in the back of their cells connected to an unguarded utility corridor. The vents were covered with metal grills, secure but not impenetrable. And so the work began. It wasn't loud or obvious. The men used sharpened spoons stolen from the mess hall, along with pieces of a discarded vacuum cleaner motor they turned into a crude drill. Night after night, they chipped away at the concrete around the vents. To hide the damage, they crafted fake vent covers from cardboard and painted them to match the prison walls. Everything had to be hidden in plain sight. They collected the chunks of concrete in pockets or pants cuffs and quietly dumped them during their daily routines. The tools were stored in a secret spot above the ceiling. Over time, the holes behind their vents grew large enough for a man to slip through. Beyond was a narrow utility corridor that led upward to an unused service area above the cell block. From there, they could access the roof, but that would be the most dangerous phase, so for now, they stayed patient. But getting out of the building was only half the problem. They still needed a way off the island. The waters around Alcatraz were merciless. Even strong swimmers risked death in the cold currents. The solution they came up with was ingenious. They would build a raft. From the prison's work areas and storage rooms, they secretly gathered over 50 raincoats, some stolen, some taken from the prison laundry. They stitched them together by hand, using thread from the prison shop and heat from steam pipes to seal the seams. The result was a makeshift, waterproof raft, along with life vests. They also had to figure out how to avoid immediate detection. If guards realized they were missing right away, a massive search would begin before they even left the island. So they decided to make dummy heads to leave in their beds. From soap, toilet paper, and real human hair stolen from the prison barber shop, they created lifelike heads complete with painted features. At night, they would tuck them under the blankets and position them on the pillows. In the dim light of a nighttime head count, they would look real enough to buy precious hours. By now, the plan had been in motion for nearly 2 years. Every day, they worked under the noses of guards and other inmates, never drawing suspicion. Morris kept a low profile, avoiding trouble. The Anglin brothers did the same. They knew that one slip, one careless mistake, would ruin everything. The date of the escape wasn't yet set, but the men were getting close. The holes were big enough. The raft was almost ready. The dummy heads were complete. All that was left was to wait for the perfect night, one when the currents, weather, and guard shifts all lined up in their favor. For now, they kept rehearsing in their minds. In the darkness of their cells, they imagined the sequence: climb through the vent, crawl the corridor, reach the roof, cross to the far side, lower themselves down, inflate the raft, and paddle into the black waters. Every night, the walls of Alcatraz felt a little less like an impenetrable fortress and a little more like a cage waiting to be broken. The prison's reputation was clear. No one could escape. But deep in the cells of Block B, 3 men were proving that impossible is just a word, and soon the rock would face its greatest challenge yet. By June 1962, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had been working on their plan for over 2 years. Every night, they chipped away at the concrete around the air vents in their cells using stolen spoons and homemade drills. They hid the noise under the sound of the prison-esque music hour and covered the holes with cardboard painted to match the wall. The openings were just big enough for a man to squeeze through, and each led to a hidden utility corridor behind the cell block. From there, the men climbed up pipes and reached a dark, dusty attic-like space above the cell block. The area wasn't guarded. It wasn't even supposed to be accessible to inmates, but it was the perfect workshop. Here, they built a raft and life vests out of over 50 stolen raincoats, sealing them together with heat from a stolen steam pipe and glue from the prison workshop. They even stitched the seams with thread taken from the prison sewing shop. To make sure their absence wouldn't be noticed during nightly head counts, they crafted dummy heads. Using a mixture of soap, toothpaste, concrete dust, and paint from the prison art class, they molded lifelike faces. They added real hair, stolen from the barber shop, and placed the heads on pillows under their blankets. To a guard glancing in with a flashlight, the decoys looked exactly like sleeping prisoners. The escape was planned for weeks, but bad weather and unexpected guard shifts kept forcing them to delay. Finally, on the night of June 11, 1962, the conditions were perfect: cold, dark, and foggy, but not stormy. After lights out, the men went to work. Frank Morris was first. He slipped through the vent in his cell, crawled into the utility corridor, and climbed the pipe to the top of the cell block. John and Clarence Anglin followed. The 4th man in the plan, Alan West, struggled. He had been unable to remove his vent cover. The cement around it had hardened, trapping him inside. He desperately chipped away at the opening, but it was no use. He was forced to abandon the plan, left behind in his cell as the others vanished into the darkness. Up in the attic space, Morris and the Anglins gathered their gear: the folded raft, paddles made from scrap wood, and the life vests. They crawled through a ventilation shaft onto the prison roof. From there, they shimmied down a drain pipe to the ground, sneaking past the gun towers without being spotted. The final obstacle was the perimeter fence, which they climbed quickly before heading to the shore. At the water's edge, they inflated the raft using a stolen concertina, a type of small accordion. The process took nearly an hour. Then, in the cold early hours of June 12th, they pushed the raft into the dark waters of San Francisco Bay. The tide was strong, the water temperature near freezing, and the fog so thick the city lights were barely visible. Somewhere out in that darkness, the three men disappeared. By morning, their cells still appeared occupied, thanks to the dummy heads, and the escape wasn't discovered until the next roll call. When guards pulled back the blankets and touched the sleeping prisoners, the heads rolled to the floor. Panic erupted. Sirens blared. Boats and helicopters swarmed the bay. The search went on 4 days. Pieces of the raincoat raft were found on Angel Island, along with a makeshift paddle, but no bodies were ever recovered. The FBI concluded the men had likely drowned. Yet others believed they had made it to shore and vanished into new lives. But on that cold, foggy night in June 1962, as the raft floated away from Alcatraz, only the waves knew the truth. In the days following the daring escape, Alcatraz became a fortress under siege from its own fear. Guards scoured every inch of the island, turning over mattresses, tearing apart ventilation shafts, and interrogating prisoners. Boats, helicopters, and search teams swept the cold waters of the bay for any sign of the three missing men. At first, optimism was high that they would be caught. The tides were brutal, the waters frigid, and the distance to shore unforgiving. Surely, many reasoned, no one could survive such a crossing. But as the hours turned into days, that certainty began to waver. Fragments of the escape began to surface. On the shoreline of Angel Island, just over a mile from Alcatraz, searchers discovered a paddle made of scrap wood and a deflated portion of the raincoat raft. The items suggested the men had indeed made it off the island and into the open bay. But there were no bodies, no footprints, and no sign of them ever reaching the mainland. The FBI, under public pressure, launched a massive investigation that would last for 17 years. The official narrative leaned toward a tragic ending. Specialists claimed the men had likely drowned before reaching shore, their bodies swept out to sea. The cold water could induce hypothermia in less than an hour, and the tides that night were particularly strong. Still, not everyone bought that explanation. Morris was a meticulous planner, and the Anglin brothers were strong swimmers who had grown up in the marshes of Florida. For some, the lack of physical evidence wasn't proof of death, it was proof they'd succeeded. Then came the whispers. In the months after the escape, the Anglin family claimed they received unsigned postcards and holiday cards, each with handwriting eerily similar to the brothers. No return address, no names, just a simple, almost taunting message: "We made it." The FBI publicly dismissed the letters as hoaxes, but privately, the case file grew thicker with unexplained leads. Sightings began to emerge from unexpected corners. A friend of the Anglin brothers swore he saw them in a bar in Rio de Janeiro in the mid-1970s. Another claimed they had been spotted living under assumed names in rural South America. A photograph from 1975, uncovered decades later, showed two men in Brazil who bore an uncanny resemblance to John and Clarence Anglin. Older, bearded, but undeniably similar. Modern forensic analysis of the photos suggested an astonishing match, though the FBI never officially confirmed it. Frank Morris left behind fewer personal ties, but rumors followed him too. In the 1980s, a man claiming to be a retired law enforcement officer said he had run into Morris in a small town in Mexico. According to his account, Morris had smiled, tipped his hat, and disappeared into a crowded market before the officer could react. Over the years, investigative journalists, amateur sleuths, and even retired agents kept the case alive. Some pointed to newly released tide charts suggesting the currents on the night of June 11th might actually have worked in the escapees' favor, pushing them toward the Golden Gate Bridge rather than out to sea. Others analyzed the timing of guard shifts, concluding the men had just enough of a head start to vanish before the alarm was raised. The biggest twist came in 2013 when the San Francisco police received a letter allegedly from one of the escapees. The writer claimed to be John Anglin and stated that Morris had died in 2008, while Clarence had passed away in 2011. He himself, the letter claimed, was dying of cancer and offered to surrender in exchange for medical treatment. The handwriting was tested, the letter dusted for fingerprints, but the results were inconclusive. Whether it was genuine or a cruel prank, no one could say for certain. Today, the escape from Alcatraz remains one of the most famous prison breaks in history and one of its greatest mysteries. The official FBI stance is still that the men likely drowned. Yet, for every expert who insists survival was impossible, there's another who points to the missing bodies, the unexplained evidence, and the stubborn resilience of the human will. For the families of the escapees, hope has never fully faded. Each unexplained knock at the door, each unfamiliar face in a crowd, carries with it the question, could it be them? For the public, the story endures not just because of its daring execution, but because it leaves us with an ending we can never quite write. Somewhere out there, perhaps in a quiet village in South America or behind a different name entirely, the three men might have lived out their lives in freedom, always looking over their shoulders, but never again behind bars. And so, more than 60 years later, the waves around Alcatraz still keep their secret. And that's the story of the night three men might have done the impossible, escaping Alcatraz. Do you think they made it, or did the bay swallow them whole? Drop your theory in the comments. I'm going to be reading every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you love true stories that sound stranger than fiction, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because I've got even crazier ones coming next. This is no cap, and the truth is always wilder than the myth.